kickoff meeting. Thank you, Brian. Our first organizational / kickoff planning meeting. I'm sure we'll be updating our internal processes and plans as we go along. I'm apologizing for the fact that our agenda is just been published. Melissa Bailey and I were working on the agenda for a couple of weeks and we didn't post it. And so I believe it's posted now. If you want to take a look at that on the site, the main topic of discussion today is going to be the subcommittee's priorities and how we should organize internally in order to advance our work towards the next climate action plan. We'll turn to that in a minute. We also want to discuss how often we want to meet and whether, what's the process for choosing a time to meet that could be a standard time. And then finally, if we have time, we'll hear quick reports from the thermal and transportation task groups. But more importantly, we'll turn to hearing about the scope of work that is planned for the transportation analysis that we asked for and that the Climate Action Office is commissioning. So let me just pause for a moment and ask, are there other topics that people would want to put on the agenda?
Rich, we need to have someone do meeting notes.
We do need to do that. So our practice has been to circulate the responsibility for taking meeting minutes around the committee. And I wonder if there's a volunteer for today. David, thank you very much. All right, David Farnsworth.
Rich, I can do this at any time, but if I can have 30 seconds at some point, maybe towards the end of the meeting, to give an update from the Science and Data Subcommittee.
Okay. I think it would be good to begin with introductions, sort of resetting who is on the committee, and we have some new people with us today. I think most everybody who's on the committee has worked closely with the other people on the committee, except for a new member we're really happy to have with us, Eric Schultz. And I wonder, Eric, if you want to say a few words about yourself, and so people can know where you're coming from and what your background is.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Richard. Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. My name's Eric. I am with Northeast Kingdom Community Action. I do financial and energy coaching through the Green Saving Smart program. So I think that I guess I'm assuming that's part of the reason, kind of how I got the invite to join you all. And I'm definitely new to the policy world. I think I'm your boots on the ground guy who's out there working every day with low-income folks, particularly here in the Northeast Kingdom. But anyway, I don't know if you all are familiar with Green Saving Smart. I don't want to take too much time, but we're a financial and energy coaching initiative. We're working with low and moderate income Vermonters, looking for ways to help them both manage their personal finances, but most importantly, offer ways to reduce their carbon usage, their carbon footprint. Yeah, so I'm really happy to be here, happy to talk with you more individually. And I know there's a lot on the agenda here, so I don't want to take a lot of time, but big hello to everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
We're really glad to have you. As you say, boots on the ground. People actually have been in the field working on helping people save energy, lower bills. Pretty important, and we're happy to have your expertise. Okay, then. Are there thoughts that people have thoughts about best times to meet and how frequently this committee should, schedule in routine meetings? Don't all speak at once. So I'll just start with the general thought. I was figuring that we would probably want to meet once a month. And that's a good, pace to start at. I went through my calendar for the prior climate action plan working sessions, and it was more frequently than that. And maybe towards the end that it's going to have to be that way again next spring or summer. But for now, once a month is what I'm going to suggest to anybody. I see Christine's nodding. Anybody else?
I agree.
I think once a month sounds good.
And recognizing that work will be done in between meetings, and we do want to meet regularly enough so that the work that is done in between the meetings can be reported and digested and reflected upon by the full committee. So I can't imagine the meeting less frequently than that as a routine matter.
Yeah, Rich, I would just throw out, we have the conversation about the potential role of the task groups. And I think that might inform if the subcommittee were to go with not bifurcating work among task groups, then that might implicate a need to meet more frequently. So we might want to revisit this piece at the end.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, Jared put in the chat, the guidance document suggests that, and science and data is doing that. Rural resilience and adaptation is starting at the same cadence as what's been proposed, and then expecting to have to ramp it up kind of around September, sort of probably after the first check-in that we have with the Climate Council, and then yeah, probably at least bi-weekly towards the end of December when we're getting our draft recommendations together. But like Melissa said, that's all kind of spelled out in the guidance document. I think that's another agenda item, so maybe best to visit later too.
All right, thanks. I think it's hard with a group of 15 to 20 people to pick a date and time, out of the blue. But I will just pause for a moment and see whether people have any particular suggestions for days of the week to avoid, times of the day to avoid.
It seemed like Thursdays worked pretty well last time, generally speaking. And once we set the time, it seemed like people were typically able to navigate their schedules, a majority of the time. Since you asked, I would say I'd prefer something like 9 to 11 on Thursdays rather than right smack in the middle of the day. But a Survey Monkey might also be an effective way to
figure that out. Right. Okay, so nominations accepted. We will send something around with proposals probably Thursday. We might lean on Thursday for this committee. And I know that I have a standing commitment Thursday morning, so I will have to not go along with Gina on that one. Or that was Christine. Anyway, As long as it's before 3 o'clock on Thursdays. All right, well, we might try 1 to 3 on Thursday or 12 to 2 or something like that.
That's what we did before. Rich, I just had one comment to make, and this is about how often we meet. I'm sorry, I'm just behind the ball here. I think a lot depends on, and I'm speaking strictly from the transportation perspective here. If we have a subcommittee that's going to manage a lot of the work, and then we're going to have to come to the Climate Council, then that will affect how much, what the Climate Council is interested in. Obviously, big decision points. Not the Climate Council, excuse me, the cross-sector mitigation team. That will affect how much cross-sector wants to get involved, because we're going to have a lot to do in transportation. And you could just say, hey, transportation subcommittee, go deal with this, and then come to us at key points. But if you want to get, if this group wants to get more involved, then that's going to take a lot more time. And we won't have enough time meeting once a month if we have to deal with all the other things that are in cross-sector's purview as we get down onto what the plan consists of.
Well, I think we're going to have this conversation in a minute about the sort of pace at which task groups can report to the committee and make sure that the full committee is involved in any recommendations. So you're touching on a point that we know needs to be dealt with.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we have tentative direction there. And I'm wondering whether this would be a good time now to just talk about, like, just kick back a little bit and identify the topic areas that you all want to make sure that we focus on, and that we're developing information and recommendations for the climate action plan. Don't want to assume that just because we did it last time that a certain way that we should do it the same way this time. And I just think I think it's important just to take a few moments to collect everybody's thoughts. Jared?
There's two initial things that really stand out to me that I think are going to be helpful as soon as possible. One is, and this is noted in the subcommittee guidance document, and it was talked about at a previous council meeting, is looking ahead to seeing the progress report that's being developed by the Climate Action Office in terms of where the recommendations from the first climate action plan stand, which ones been implemented, which ones are in process and where they are in that timeline, which ones have not moved forward and why. I think there's that necessary stock taking of the existing recommendations. And then when it comes to updating or revising those, adapting them, or adding new, I think one of the most important pieces of information will be an updated pathways analysis, including an updated business as usual set of estimates. I think, as folks know from the presentation I shared with the Climate Council in January, I had a number of significant concerns and questions that have not yet been addressed in terms of the BAU projections for the 2025 emissions. And I feel like getting answers to those questions and having an updated pathways analysis and having an updated BAU projection will be critically important to inform the scale and pace of the recommendations that we will need to make in order to meet our legal obligations under the Solutions Act. So those are the two big things for me. When are we going to see and be able to provide feedback on that progress report? When are the questions that have been raised about the pathways analysis, or the BAU specifically, and the updated pathways analysis? My understanding is the Climate Action Office is in progress on both of those. I think has a draft of the progress report and is working on designing either an RFP or a contract amendment on the BAU or pathways pieces. But those to me are two of the most important foundational pieces.
Okay, so those are, as you say, foundational things that we should make sure to focus on in the early going. That's what I heard. Is that right, Jared?
Yeah, and I think the challenge is that some of that information may not be available in the early going, or there may be preliminary or tentative information that will then be updated, when, that may be later in the fall even. And so I think it's something that we're going to have to get as much of a clear sense as we can at the beginning, but then return to and get updates on as that may evolve.
Oh, okay. All right, that makes sense. Other thoughts, high-level thoughts about our, what should be in our work plan? Dave?
Yeah, Rich, I think in having discussions over the last few months about these topics, it's become really clear that workforce development is, no matter what topic you're talking about, that's what people bump into. And so figuring out how that fits into our work here, I think is going to be really important, because all the best ideas, if we can't find people to deliver these sorts of things, then really we just don't even get out, out of the driveway. We don't even get going. There are also financial barriers. It'd be good to catch up on the tariff on bill financing pilots out there, see where they are, see if there are interesting results that inform next steps. I hope somebody's taking notes about these. I'm only joking. I will do that. Those are a couple things. I mean, more broadly, the rental market is where we have to focus, and it's just such a tough nut to crack. And I hope we continue to circle around that and work on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Christine.
This is along the concept of foundational activities, not necessarily foundational resources, like reports that are already or contract work that's already being commissioned. But I don't know about others, but speaking for myself, I can think of a few topics that it would be beneficial to make sure we're all starting off with the same level of knowledge about, along the lines of updates, where are things with the clean heat standard, for example, the topics that Dave just suggested. There's been a network action team on workforce development. So perhaps a portion of our monthly meetings in the earlier phases of our work would include, each one might include 1 or 2 15-minute concise briefings for the benefit of this group, coming from others who have been in leadership roles on that work. And we might, as a group, not necessarily today, come up with, I'm just going to pick a number, say maybe 5 topics that just seem so central that we all ought to have a common base of knowledge. Some of you will have deep knowledge on all of them already, because you're so engaged in this work as part of your livelihood. Some of us may not so much. So especially as it relates to the implications of the legislative session that's just wrapping up, the really current, fast-moving stuff. If I'm the only one that doesn't feel on top of that for some of these foundational issues, I'll commit to taking the time to school myself up. But it occurred to me I might not be the only one in that situation.
Christine,
That's totally agree, Christine. That'd be very useful for me as well.
Joey?
I think Dave, Christine, Eric underscoring, I very much appreciate what you've all put on the table. Totally agree on workforce. Also agree on the financing stuff, like the financing and funding. Maybe part of the funding is really understanding, again, the federal programs, sort of COVID era programs, that have limited durations. Like what's happening with some of those new programs, including, like, for example, the one that Eric works on. Like, this is a really important program, sort of energy and financial coaching, and I understand that there may not be dollars to keep that program going unless, some grants funds are secured. So sort of as part and parcel of the financing and funding conversation, understanding what's happening with the federal funds too, so that we know how much, what kind of a runway do we need to create through financing or other revenues seems important to me. So just some underscoring and appreciating what others have also articulated, and just wanted to add a little bit more about potentially looking at just the funding landscape with time limited duration.
Thank you. Christine, your hand is still up, or? Yeah.
I put it down and back up, but just riffing on this part of the conversation a little bit further. And with some of the topics like workforce development, probably clean heat standard, I think it would be helpful if the presenter were thinking about, with an eye towards where there are known blockades and gaps, that the next iteration of the climate action plan should be focusing in on and thinking about possible new approaches to address, the current best understanding of where the real known blockades are in the space of workforce development, as opposed to an update on all the wonderful work that's been going on over the last year or two, more of a problem solving or problem revealing approach, given the work ahead of us to come up with strategies and actions to address problems. So I think that would be, I don't think we need here Dog Pony Show. It needs to be targeted towards what should the climate action plan be doing better at addressing and helping us think that through.
Thanks, Christine. Let me, since time is really limited today and we want to have a discussion about internal procedures, maybe we should limit this part of the conversation, but let me invite everybody to share their ideas for the key briefings to follow Christine's suggestion that we, might want to schedule. And when just, send those notes around, or send me a note and I'll post it. We can keep a running list of the kinds of information that should be brought to the committee. I think we were in such a race to get the climate action plan off the ground last time that we didn't do a lot of level setting across the committee. And I agree with the observation that it would be really good to do that. And while we're at it, I'll add that we want to make sure that we have a process for hearing from the other committees of the Climate Council on just transitions, rural resilience, ag and eco, science and data, to make sure that, we're proceeding in a way that's at least understanding what they're doing, and ideally, in a very compatible way with what they're proposing to do. So that's another, and a whole other level of sort of scheduled work that we probably have to pay attention to. But let's turn to the question of structure, internal working groups, that kind of thing. And Melissa Bailey and I have had some good conversations about this. And maybe, Melissa, you can lead us off with this.
Sure, yeah, I can jump in. And realizing we didn't do introductions for the whole group, but for Eric and for the subcommittee, Melissa Bailey with the Department of Public Service. And while I'm not new to this work, I am new as a subcommittee co-chair along with Rich. So glad to be with you all. Recognizing that previously the subcommittee structured its work by assigning topic areas to different task groups, we did want to spend a little bit of time today on our initial meeting talking about what the pros and cons of that approach had been in the past and how it worked for subcommittee members. and whether we want to, again, structure the work going forward over the next roughly year and a couple of months, or if there were advantages and disadvantages to having the subcommittee itself basically attend all of the meetings and tackle all of the topic areas. So again, you all, most of you have been participating in this work for longer than I have. Wanted to hear thoughts on the subcommittee structures, the task group structures.
Any thought? And Melissa, I apologize. You are new to this committee officially, but I just regard you as part of the ecosystem so thoroughly that I didn't call that out at the beginning.
So Christine, I can't remember if your hand was still up. Did you want to jump in on this one? No, okay, so Jared's hand is up.
Thanks, Melissa. I'll just offer a reflection that given the amount of just background research and information to gather and conversations to have to prepare, conversations to be framed in a fully informed and efficient way for the full subcommittee and for the full council, I have found task groups to be very valuable. I would be very skeptical that I think that if we were going to have every conversation that and in terms of gathering background information and preparing conversations for the full if we were going to do that by a full subcommittee for everything, I think we'd have to move to like weekly meetings. To me, the key thing is that what task groups are doing is the background work to gather information and help frame up and inform conversations, but that any decisions or recommendations are happening at the full subcommittee and then the council meeting. And to me, what the guidance has always been is that whenever there's a recommendation presented, the practice has been present that recommendation, discuss it at one meeting, and then actually decide on it or take a vote if we can't try to come to consensus or take a vote at a subsequent meeting of the subcommittee. Then it goes to the council. Then that's presented and discussed. And then there's a subsequent meeting at which a consensus decision or a vote is taken. So, you know, even with the presence of task groups, I am reminded that any substantive recommendation that would go into the climate action plan or be voted on by the council is going to have 4 meetings at which it is analyzed, vetted, discussed. And so to me, having task groups, again, do that background work to help inform and prepare those conversations as well as possible is a really good and efficient use of time. So long as task groups, which they never have, and I don't think they would, don't veer into the full subcommittee or the full council role, which is actually making decisions on recommendations, but is preparatory work in advance of those conversations. That's kind of my view of task groups and their utility, and then the appropriateness of the process of having these really multiple steps at the subcommittee and council level before any substantive recommendations move forward.
Thanks, Jared. That's helpful for my own knowledge as well as for the group to hear that perspective. So just to make sure I'm capturing that correctly, the task groups did not come to the subcommittee with recommendations. Is that essentially what you're saying? Recommendations really came out of the subcommittee itself rather than task groups?
Sometimes task groups would draft up a recommendation or draft options, but those would then be discussed, analyzed, and then decided on by the subcommittee. So I guess the distinction I'm making is no final decision is made by a task group. Decisions can be framed up and or actions recommended by a task group, but that would need to go through the deliberative process both at the subcommittee and the council level.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. That's helpful. Any other thoughts about what has previously worked well with the task groups or what has been challenging with the task groups? Yeah, Joey.
I mean, I generally would agree with what Jared was articulating. It feels like when there's substantive work, it helps to have a little bit of a work group who can like serve up something for a broader group discussion, and that has worked well. I mean, I think we're going to try to do as much as a cross-sector subcommittee, and to be determined. I mean, I'm grateful that we have a good climate action plan to build from, and so maybe it will not be as rigorous as it was before. We also, in the transportation arena, which, you know, was the work that I was helping with, you know, we did have a task group that was a big meaty piece of work, but we did lift that up to the subcommittee and to the, so it went through the process that Jared just described. I anticipate that there will be embedded per the transportation addendum that we adopted some, you know, obviously work related to the transportation effort through this study. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, I think it worked pretty well. I don't know what sort of task groups we might need moving forward. So I don't know if we need to 100% answer this question in this moment, but I do, when you're tackling some substantive things, I think having something for a broader group to respond to and iterate on before any decisions are made can be helpful. So there can be a role of task groups. And then also just noting that there is a very different, the task groups operated very differently. So I don't know what that is to say, but like, anyway, I'll stop there. Now I'm rambling.
I was gonna ask if you could just clarify that last point. You mean the task groups operated differently than the subcommittee or differently than each other? Could you elaborate at all on that?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, like the transportation, I know like the biomass task group had like was staffed and structured, like, and that was a big, massive piece of work. And we, you know, so I'm not asking for that. I just like there was different sort of approaches to how some of the task groups operated. I think the goal is to be efficient and transparent, and make decisions publicly, but maybe that there has been value in doing some work so that there can be a broader conversation with the group, like through the subcommittee structure.
Yeah, Rich.
Well, I'm largely in agreement with what has been said so far about the task groups being a place where research can happen, where ideas can be discussed and thoughts brought to the full committee, but that it, you know, it's worth reminding ourselves that even the full committee doesn't, we can make recommendations to the Climate Council, but we can't adopt any aspects of the climate plan ourselves. It's only our committee's thoughts going to the Climate Council. And that's as it should be. That's just fine. Since this, I'd say, I appreciate all the staff support that we get and did get with respect to the development of our work plans. But for the most part, you know, we're not an agency that has a staff that goes out and does the research and does the work and brings it back to us. We are, in essence, our own staff. And so when we're operating in a task group, we're actually operating as, you know, working staff for the benefit of the subcommittee. And if we view ourselves as basically, you know, doing a staff function at the time that we're working as a member of a task group, in support of the committee, it would help to frame our work products, I think, pretty well, both with respect to research and, you know, data assembly, and also with respect to whatever ideas we would want to put in front of the full committee. My question for the group today would be that whether the main task groups that we had last time are the ones we want to continue with. We had a thermal/buildings task group, a transportation group, a very small electric power sector task group, and then we kind of had everything else, you know. But as Joey pointed out, subsequently we created the biomass task group, which was cross-committee, you know, separate, a separate kind of structure. But just, I guess I would ask people, if we were doing it today, would we have roughly the same structure, or would we, are there gaps there that we think, well, man, we really should have a test group on workforce, on finance, on emissions from agriculture. I mean, we've stayed away from that. We've presumed that that's the purview of ag and ecosystems. What about industrial emissions and the waste sector? These are not topics that we had work groups on, and partly because we just didn't have the time. I'll stop. Thanks. I see lots of good hands up.
Lots of hands, and I'm not remembering the order. Andrea, I think you.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounded like a lot of task groups. So thinking of how much time people have on this subcommittee, I think that's something to just be mindful of. And I think we have to just be careful of what other groups are forming. I know for the transportation task group, the scope of work is not complete yet, and people are going to have a chance to weigh in on that, but there is a proposal to have a task group within that. So I don't think there would be any need to have a task group that has members from this subcommittee on that, and then have another task group and then report out to the subcommittee as a whole. So I don't know that we can say clearly right now which group should remain intact or be modified until we kind of have some of that other work ironed out.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And see the note in the chat too, Dave, about understanding where progress has and hasn't been made. So this might be a conversation that we continue at our next meeting around working group, task group assignments. But Jared, go ahead, please.
I think Christine may have been ahead of me. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Jared, if it's related to this conversation.
Yeah, and I to Melissa agree with what Dave put in the chat. The one thing I would say is that while I think it can be helpful to kind of get our arms around and get purchase on things to organize them on kind of a sectoral basis, and that also really aligns, with the way the greenhouse gas emissions inventory is organized, the way that the climate action plan is organized. The one thing that I worry a little bit about is that if each task group is focused sectorally, we may miss the opportunity, or it may not as naturally appear to us the opportunity for multi-sector or cross-sector recommendations. And so I don't know if that means that it makes sense to have a task group on those type of recommendations, exploring them, or whether that's just a lens that we need to continually remind ourselves to bring both in the task groups and in the subcommittee. But I will note, for instance, that one of the big questions that will come out of any analysis of a transportation cap and invest possible program would be, among many questions, would be, is it limited just to the importation of transportation fuels, or are there other emissions that would make sense to cover under that cap as well? And I wouldn't want to not have a place for that analysis and those discussions to happen if there are cross-cutting or multi-sector recommendations that are really appropriate to emerge from this subcommittee and be considered for the next climate action plan.
I think riffing off all of what's been said, I would feel I think it worked well for the majority of our work to have sector-focused task groups. And a logical place to start, in my mind, is to take a look by sector at how we're doing once we have the progress report. And for this, for at least I'll speak just for myself, as one half of the thermal sector task group last time, until Brian was added as staff, and important support, but it was largely Dave Farnsworth and me looking at the thermal sector, as I recall. And I would be happy to take a look at the progress report with the thermal sector in mind, compare it to what we had laid out as objectives for the thermal sector in the initial climate action plan, to do some research and updating to figure out what else has been going on and where other people see there's ongoing gaps, and then to work with Dave or whoever else to come up with a set of revised, updated, possibly expanded, proposed strategies and actions for the subcommittee to consider, with an eye towards where there might be cross-sector issues that would involve cross-sector involvement, but to start at the sector-specific level. Personally, that to me would seem like a logical, efficient way to place ourselves back in what we thought would happen over the last 3 years and bring ourselves up to date, and then see what cross-sector and non-sectoral issues rise to the surface that need to be addressed urgently, and figure out if we have the people power to take them on in addition to the other work. That's just how my view about it.
Great, thanks, Christine. And just being mindful of time, I mean, I think I'm hearing appetite for continuing with the task group structure, and that we need to spend some more time thinking about what the appropriate task groups and how many we can reasonably accommodate within the subcommittee, potentially coming out of that once we've had the chance to review the progress report. And, in my own mind, I'd add the once the legislative session has wrapped up and we understand implications from this session. So hopefully we'll have that insight as of our next meeting in mid-May, potentially. So I know we have a couple of other agenda items, and again, I want to make sure we leave a few minutes for public comment at the end, as well as the update on the transportation sector scope of work. So I guess we can probably close out this task group conversation with quick updates from the transportation task group and the thermal task group. I think, Dave, you were going to do thermal, and Joey, were you going to do transportation? If we can just spend a couple minutes for the whole group's benefit, kind of level setting where we left things.
Sure. I'm happy to start. I can be brief on transportation. The task group has not met, and that has not really been a thing. We haven't done any work really as a climate council since we adopted the addendum to the climate action plan, just saying we need to build off the carbon reduction strategy and do further work to analyze even more joining a cap and invest program for transportation plus, or a clean transportation fuel standard could look like. I could lean into Andrea, but what I understand is that there's a scope of work being put together to do that analysis, and I think that effort is moving as quickly as possible. So I guess now we're going to get to the work of studying it. Andrea, do you want to speak to, because I really have not been very involved. Do you want to speak more to the timing and process?
Yeah, I can do that, of course. Yeah, so obviously the transportation recommendation, the addendum to the climate action plan. And then there's also proposed language in the T-bill. And now that seems pretty set as the way it will go forward. It's been, reviewed proposed by the House and then reviewed by the Senate. So I think we're all set on that language now that that's done, where we being primarily Jane and Megan and I, and now Brian helping out too, have drafted a draft scope of work, just finishing that up, hoping to share that with, in the draft scope of work, we name a technical advisory committee And so hoping to share that. I'm not sure if Jane has had the opportunity to schedule a meeting, but a meeting either Wednesday or Thursday of this week to review that with the technical advisory committee and make sure the scope of work is what we want it to be. Hopefully have that done in the next week or so. And then we are putting it out through a retainer contract that the Agency of Transportation has. It's a much more streamlined process than putting it out through any other contracting mechanism that either VTrans or ANR has. So that's hopefully going to go out by the end of the month. There's a bunch of interim timelines that I have defined, checking in with folks right now who handle some of our contracting. But the goal is to have somebody on contract by June 1st for that. And yeah, we do have to go out to sort of a bid process within our retainer contracts. We have 4 consultant firms on retainer, and because we have more than one entity that has the capacity or potentially the capacity, the capability, the technical capability to do this work, we do have to go out to everybody to see if they want to submit a proposal for it. But we're going to keep that timeline pretty tight, a week for them to ask questions, a week to respond to questions, a week more for them to get proposals in, and then a week to select a consultant, which brings us right to June 1st. So hopefully we can get through that scope of work in the next week with the advisory committee members. And that's really just the entities that are named in the T-bill language from the Vermont Climate Council. So I think what that means is in people, it means Rich, Joey, and Jared, and a couple of people from the state team and the treasurer's office. The way it's being proposed right now, of course, we'll revise that with further input.
I have a quick question just for the benefit of the rest of the committee. The scope of work for this study would include some options with respect to joining a cap and trade regime, New York or WCI or whatever. Would it also cover low carbon fuel standard as an option?
Yep.
Okay.
And beyond transportation fuels also, to Jared's point of which task groups we might want to have. But again, that covered through a technical advisory committee. I would hope that we don't have another sub task group to work on that outside of that.
Thanks for that update.
And Andreas, just for me and the group, what's the end date of having the analysis done? Can you refresh me on that?
The analysis, there's a few dates in the legislative language. The treasurer has to have a recommendation to a couple of committees by February 15th next year. So we are, having them be involved along the way so that they can kind of keep track of what's going on. But asking the consultant right now, the proposal is to have the draft report by the end of the year, which will give, and then a final report by February 1st. That's the way I have it drafted right now. Again, up to, further input from the team. But yeah, kind of the last parts of it kind of happening in parallel with the treasurer's office and the final drafting of the report. It is a tight timeline, so trying to figure out how to give the most time and keep things moving along.
So I'm conscious of the passage of time here. We wanted to reserve 5 minutes at the end for public comment. And so that, Dave, that gives you approximately 2 minutes to talk about thermal.
Did I hear my name mentioned?
Yeah, can you give us a short update on thermal status of the working group, if any?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should be better prepared. It'll be quite short. Of course, clean heat standards being reviewed now, and efforts are undergoing with the utility commissions effort. They've assembled a technical advisory group to support that work. And that's underway, and it's supposed to be ready by with recommendations to the legislature by the first of the year. That's going on. As far as work that the staff group undertook last year, we have had sporadic conversations, but nothing really substantive. And so I would say that this meeting is the first meeting of this subgroup, and at least the broader group. And we look forward to starting it again once we get going.
All right, thank you. We now, Joey?
Sorry, I just wanted to, before we move to public comment, just appreciate the very specific recommendations that Liz and Christine had noted in the chat for our fabulous note taker, Dave Farnsworth, because these are, I think, both good ideas. Thanks, sorry.
Thank you.
And Rich, if it's okay to have that 30 seconds for the Science and Data Subcommittee update.
Please go. Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
Thanks, Melissa. So two things. Some members of this subcommittee know this, but 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, the Science and Data Subcommittee met to receive and discuss the report from Eastern Research Group, ERG, on what was known as the life cycle analysis. It was really looking at the upstream emissions associated with Vermont's energy use. For anybody who's interested in reviewing that, very relevant to this subcommittee, you can find those materials at the link I just put in the chat. And I just also wanted to give members of this subcommittee a heads up that the next meeting of the Science and Data Subcommittee may be of interest to you as well. We will be meeting on Wednesday, April 24th, next week from 1 to 3 p.m. And the main subject of that agenda will be a presentation from Elizabeth Koppitz, who is the lead author of the Environmental Protection Agency's report that was published in December on the social cost of greenhouse gases and their updated recommendations. Elizabeth is with the National Center for Environmental Economics, housed out of the EPA. And for folks who want to read that report, you can find it at that link that I just put in the chat, but we would, given the relevance of the social cost of greenhouse gases to, this and other subcommittees and the whole council, we would very much welcome, members of this subcommittee, other councilors, interested folks to attend that briefing and learn from. I mean, what a wonderful thing to be able to get the lead author of this national study that just came out and was done in such a thorough interagency manner. So looking forward to that.
Thanks, Jared. This is our time for public comment. If there are those members of the public attending who'd like to speak to the committee, please speak up. Steve.
Hi, thanks. Well, first of all, just as always, I really appreciate all the work. I'm trying to get my camera to work here. There we go. Hi, everybody. Okay. So yeah, I very much appreciate all the work you're doing and the expertise you all bring. It's just always really impressive to me how much expertise you all bring to this in a very generous way to the state of Vermont. So my brief comment regarding how you're operating through the next year and that whole discussion that you had earlier. As a member of the public who has followed this, one of the things that has come up as a concern over the last several years is that the subcommittee structures or the task group structures that you have not always been friendly to public meeting types of values. And I think there's a lot of variation from task group to task group, some more so than others. And so I would recommend that y'all have some kind of a open discussion about how you're going to operate with those, how those task groups should operate with regard to public participation. I know that there were times when people wanted to be involved and listen and were told, no, you can't be part of this because then we'd have to invite everybody. And of course that's, you could invite everybody and you still only get one person. So I guess I'd encourage you to do that, and as much as possible, maintain that open status that you do with the subcommittees and the climate council. Because I guess I would add to that as much as you have the overall task group in the council, or the overall subcommittee and the council affirming decisions, I think a lot of things really do get decided in those task groups. And there's such nuance to a lot of these things that does get decided in the task groups out of the public view. And it's just, and it has to be that way. There's just so much to it that you can't possibly cover all those details as you start getting mountains and mountains of material to deal with. So anyway, that's it. That's my one comment. And again, thank you all very much.
Thanks, Steve. Anyone else? All right. We're at our hour. Melissa, anything from you? Any closing comments? I mean, I just want to thank everybody. I'm looking forward to the next marathon that we're going to be running together. Looking forward to working with you all.
Yeah, thanks all. We'll definitely need a lot more time for our next meeting, and we've got a lot of action items, and thanks to Dave for taking notes. And we'll get organized and take what was in the chat and make sure we get a time that works for everybody for a 2-hour meeting coming up in roughly a month.
Thank you.
Nice job getting through that.
Thank you.
Sounds
Bye.
good. Thank you.